So welcome to my office. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about injury. For those of you who don't know, I'm a chiropractor. I work a lot in the field of sports medicine, which is what kind of sparked my interest in actually producing this video series, was to help the people who, the kind of people who come and visit my office, particularly at this time of year when Comrades is very close and it's going to affect your run. So generally injury, as a generalization, over running injuries and injuries that kind of recreational sports people tend to suffer from in general, it will start with a subtle alteration in the way that you move. I'm going to refer to that alteration in the way that you move as mechanics. So there's a change in mechanics. The mechanics will then change the way that load is distributed throughout your body. That load will then tend to target an area, which will then lead to an injury. So that's just a generalization as to how the common types of injuries that runners and recreational sports people deal with. So yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pathway to injury. I was a little bit spurred on by a blog that a colleague of mine posted, kind of poking fun at runners at this time of year. They arrive in droves, broken and bent, and still wanting to run Comrades when they should have come a long time ago. So this video is aimed at helping those of you that tend to be that way, and runners do tend to be that kind of patient. So I'll try and address some of the reasons why and how you can help yourself. The kind of people that arrive here with the types of injuries that I'm talking about, there generally are two pathways that are the most common. So the most common one I'm going to refer to as a flexion pattern. So the flexion pattern refers to the fact that we generally sit too much. So I'm actually preparing for an exam at the moment. I have seen a few patients today, but in a few days' time I'll be writing the first exam that I have written for a number of years. And I'm taking a break right now by making this video, just to give my head a bit of a rest. But I'm sitting doing it, and a lot of the day, although I try and avoid it, I am sitting, and I sit too much. Almost everybody who is watching this video sits too much. The reason that sitting is bad for you is because your body actually adapts to that flexed position. So flexed means basically bent over forwards. So if I was to stand up and keep my hips and pelvis area in the same position, I would be bent over forwards. So that's what the flexion is. When your body adapts to being in that position for a long period of time, the reason why I use adapt is because your body becomes used to that position and finds a way of being in that position for a long period of time. What happens then is that your hip flexors become tight, and they have mechanical advantage in this position. They're kind of cutting the corner. So they tight and strong, and they overcome the power and the strength in your hip flexors overcomes everything at the back of your hips. So that works into extension and into rotation. Now, your hip extensors are very important for supporting you when you're in an upright posture. So having a flexion pattern therefore negatively impacts you when you are upright and standing. Now, when we are running, we are upright and standing, plus there's impact. Okay, so we're changing the mechanics of that situation because our body is adapted to a flexed position. It causes tight and weak hip extensors that are lazy, that don't function and fire the way that they should. The tight and strong hip flexors in the front limit hip movement and limit your kind of your stride length and your range of motion, which also then contributes to changing your mechanics. And when we run, we get all of the power for running should come out of extension. So when we're referring to running, we actually talk about efficient running. Like the top runners in the world all have very good what we call triple extension. So that is full extension at your hip, full extension at your knee and full extension at your ankle. When that occurs simultaneously at the kind of extreme end toe of your stride pattern, you're getting the maximum power out of your stride as well as the maximum stride length. So when you watch the top runners run, their power comes from extension, and the power comes from behind you in running. It doesn't come from anything in the front, from your quads and your hips. The power that propels you forward comes from behind you. It comes from extension. So that flexion pattern is completely opposite to that, and limits hip extension. So what happens when somebody's in a flexion pattern is your body tries to find another way of creating forward movement and creating power. So the most common ways of doing that is that people start to overstride. So they'll reach out, and instead of having an impact point on the road or the trail or whatever it is, close to being underneath your hips, and then pushing back into extension and trying to get full triple extension, they will stride out in front of themselves, and their contact point will be in front of the hip. That results in what we call vertical oscillation, which is bouncing up and down, so more impact, and is also very inefficient. You have to do a lot of work to run at the same speed when you're overstriding versus when you're not overstriding. So there are more forces involved, and you're using your body inefficiently. So you're changing that load distribution pattern again. The mechanics are inefficient, and it's very likely that the load will target an area and cause an injury. So that's a brief summary. I hope I haven't got too complicated there, of how the flexion pattern caused by too much sitting leads to injury. What you need to do to overcome that, if you do sit a lot, is first of all be aware of it, and be aware of how you need to work in your preparation and training to fight the flexion. So you'll have you'll need to do a lot of like core work and work into extension to open up those hip flexors in the front and get full powerful extension, particularly out of your hips. Your hip is where most of the power should come from. Your hip joint, when it's working efficiently, has the most mechanical advantage out of all the other joints that are in play here. So it's very important to use the hips efficiently. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about that, I suggest you look up Lauren Flingen's YouTube channel. He's got a lot of very sensible, very simplified chat and very useful tools that you can use to help yourself, to help you open up the front of the hips and get the extensors working and get full range of motion out of those hips. Then the second very common pathway that leads to injury, that is very common particularly with runners, is a catalogue of disasters, I'm going to call that, where a minor injury leads to a major one, and the pattern gets very complicated and then difficult to treat, and it takes a long time to get better. So classically this really arrives at this time of year. Classically somebody will arrive saying, I've got X problem, whether it be Achilles tendon, plantar fasciitis, runner's knee, RTB, those are the common types of things, ischial bursitis, or hamstring origin bursitis. Those are the most common ones that arrive, and the story will start with 3 months ago, and then it will carry on from there. So a person like that has been struggling for 3 months with their training hampered along the way, hasn't been able to train properly. They've been running with an altered movement pattern as a result of and now it's become too much and they can't cope with it anymore. So the reason why runners do that, or it's very common with runners, is because there seems to be this abiding kind of inherent want to carry on training when you are injured. So triathletes, as an example, they do, like an Ironman triathlete, they train to run a marathon after they have run 180 k's. They spend hours on the bike, they spend hours running on the road, but when they are injured, they will tend to seek help and rest in order to get better, whereas runners will tend to try and just run less, and in so doing so the problem becomes more complicated. So classically it might start with a niggle. Now I'm going to present a scenario and you'll see the reason why. So let's say it is a problem under somebody's foot and they can't push off properly off their big toe or their second toe, and they start to shift the weight while they are running in their toe onto the outside of the foot instead of going off the big toe, which is the most efficient way. You should try and toe off your big toe. So they'll shift the load onto the outside of the foot and start to run inefficiently, but they'll try and run at the same speed that they were running at before. So just like the flexion pattern, they'll be trying to find other ways of other ways that are more inefficient to run at the same speed. The change in mechanics will result in a change of load distribution. That load then targets an area, and you result with a more complicated injury pattern than the original injury. So somebody with a problem under their foot may end up with something like a runner's knee because they are trying to use their quad and their anterior chain more to propel themselves forward than they are using their extensor pattern, which is where the power should come from. As I mentioned earlier, it should come out of extension. So the reason why I chose the foot there is because your foot is the only place in your body where you get free energy. I'm going to refer to it as your plantar fascia. There are muscles in there which are obviously actively contractile and take energy, and you can strengthen it up, but a large proportion of the tissue under your foot is basically tendinous and ligamentous, and it's elastic. In other words, it recoils back to its original shape when you load it. That's the only part of your body where you can get free energy. And if you are not toeing off of your big toe, you are not using your windlass mechanism effectively. Part of that mechanism being used effectively means that you need to get triple extension right. So people that overstride, they will tend to push off a flexed knee and use muscle power to propel themselves forward, rather than using that mechanical advantage that comes from triple extension and an efficient windlass mechanism. So you can see how all of these patterns all kind of mingle together into some very, very common reasons why runners get injured. Now, in the second scenario that I mentioned, generally a runner will start with a niggle, and as I'll say, people will come in and arrive in an office like mine and say, 3 months ago I had this, and they'll try and train a bit less, or they'll try and run a bit differently. You know, like for example, with a calf issue or whatever, they'll try and run a little bit more flat-footed and not toe off as strongly and be able to continue training. But they've changed their mechanics, it's changed the load distribution pattern, and they're going to be using power from somewhere else. That accumulation of load will then lead to injury in other places and may lead to a more complicated scenario that becomes more difficult to address. It also then leads to a learnt movement pattern which is not ideal and has to be unlearnt in order to fix the problem. Now, when we are dealing with these types of injuries in my office and lots of other people's office that do similar types of work to me, often the mechanical problem of fixing an injury is actually quite simple to identify and quite simple to fix. Even when it's quite complicated, you just kind of work through it and figure out where the important parts of the body are that need to move correctly, restore movement, and it's pretty quick and simple. However, once a learnt pattern has occurred, to untrain that and relearn a more correct pattern becomes quite tricky. Now, we talk about minimum effective change in these scenarios. That is the minimum amount of change that is needed to combat the road to injury. Now, for most people, because we're dealing with habitual postural patterns, that is a fairly continual battle that needs to be fought. So you'll need to identify what exercises you need to do, whether it be mobility or coordination and activation work that you need to do to kind of fight your individual battle. And you'll need to pick the brain of whoever you're working with to figure out what that is so that you can help yourself. There's no kind of cookbook strategy that will work for everybody. However, kind of core stability and coordination, effective glute function, and fighting the flexion. So overcoming that flexion pattern in most people is very important. Keeping your stability muscles strong and keeping your glutes firing and keeping your hip working into full extension is very important. Your feet are very, very important. Getting full range and full elasticity and flexibility and strength out of all that tissue to do with the windlass mechanism, which is that towing off elastic free energy that you can get that recoils and helps to move you forward. Incidentally, that's also one of the reasons why females tend to look better than males at the end of marathons and ultramarathons. Genetically, females have a genetic advantage over males with regard to the constitution of that non-elastic tissue. Sorry, it is elastic, it's non-contractile. The non-contractile tissue which is present in your plantar fascia, so they get the free energy, which is obviously very efficient because it's free as long as you're moving correctly, for longer before the elasticity kind of fades when running long distances. So yeah, that's just a brief summary. If you're just preparing for running or endurance sports events in general, then feel free to hit me up on the web. You can look up Elite Chiropractic on Facebook. You're obviously watching my YouTube channel right now, and my Persistence Runner Twitter profile, or also at Elite Chiro Durban on Twitter. Yeah, and I can try and weigh in on any questions that you may have. Running ultramarathon, particularly comrades, is a passion of mine, and I run in my mother's old number, so I'd like to hold on to that number and keep it going and get a few more medals under the belt. I've got 5 medals so far, so hoping to add to the tally this year and going forward. But good luck, everybody. If you see me on the road, give me a shout. Hopefully these videos have helped some of you, and yeah, enjoy the day. Pray for some good weather on the 10th of June, and I'll see you on the road.